2 Kings chapter 9. And Elisha the prophet called one of the sons of the prophets and said to him, Tie up your loin, and take the flask of this oil in your hand, and be gone unto Ramoth Gilead. And you shall enter there, and you shall see there Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi. And you shall enter, and you shall raise him from out of the midst of his brothers, and shall bring him into the closet from out of a storeroom. And you shall take the flask of the oil, and you shall pour upon his head. And you shall say, Thus says the Lord, I have anointed you for king over Israel. And you shall open the door, and shall flee, and not wait. And the young prophet went unto Ramoth Gilead. And he entered, and behold, the commanders of the force were sitting down. And he said, A word from me to you, commander. And Jehu said, To whom from all of us? And he said, To you, commander. And he rose up and entered into the house, and he poured the oil upon his head. And he said to him, Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I have anointed you for king over the people of the Lord, over Israel. And you shall utterly destroy the house of Ahab, your master, from my face. And you shall avenge the blood of my bondmen, the prophets, and the blood of all the bondmen of the Lord, from the hand of Jezebel, and from the hand of the entire house of Ahab. And you shall utterly destroy to Ahab the ones urinating against a wall, and the one being held, and the one being left free in Israel. And I will appoint the house of Ahab as the house of Jeroboam son of Nebat, and as the house of Baasha son of Ahijah. And the dogs shall eat Jezebel in the portion of Jezreel, and there shall not be one burying her. And he opened the door and fled. And Jehu came forth to the servants of his master, and they said to him, Peace? What is it that this one, overcome by convulsions, entered to you? And he said to them, You know the man and his meditation. And they said, That's unjust, but announce to us. And he said to them, Such and such he said to me, saying, Thus says the Lord, I anoint you for king over Israel. And hearing, they hastened, and each took his cloak, and put them underneath him, upon the frame of the stairs. And they trumped with the horn, and said, Jehu reigns! And Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi, confederated against Joram. And Joram guarded in Ramoth Gilead, he and all Israel, before Hazael king of Syria. And Joram the king returned to be treated medically in Jezreel from the wounds which the Syrians hit him in his waging war against Hazael king of Syria. And Jehu said, If your soul is with me, let there not go forth from out of the city any one escaping to go and report in Jezreel. And Jehu rode and went unto Jezreel, for Joram was being attended to in Jezreel. And Ahaziah king of Judah came down to see Joram. And the watchman was standing upon the tower in Jezreel, and he beheld the cloud of dust of the multitude of Jehu in his coming. And he said, I see a cloud of dust of the multitude. And Joram said, Take a rider, and send for meeting them, and let him say, Is it peace? And the rider went upon the horse for meeting him, and he said, Thus says the king, Is it peace? And Jehu said, What is it to you and peace? You turn to the ones behind me. And the watchman reported, saying, The messenger came unto them, and returned not. And he sent a second rider of a horse. And he came to them, and he said, Thus says the king, Is it peace? And Jehu said, What is it to you and peace? You turn to the ones behind me. And the watchman reported, saying, He came unto them, and returned not. And the leader is as the leader Jehu, son of Nimshi, for he is in a frenzy. And Joram said, Team up chariots. And they teamed up. And Joram, king of Israel, went forth, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, each man in his chariot. And they came forth for meeting Jehu, and found him in the portion of Naboth the Jezreelite. And it came to pass, as Joram beheld Jehu, that he said, Is it peace, Jehu? And Jehu said, What is it to you and peace, with still the harlotries of Jezebel your mother, and her many potions? And Joram turned his hands to flee, and said to Ahaziah, Treachery, Ahaziah! And Jehu filled his hand with the bow, and struck Joram between his arms, and came forth the arrow through his heart, and he bent upon his knees. And Jehu said to Bidkar his tribune, Take, and toss him in the portion of the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. For I remember, I and you mounting upon teams after Ahab his father. And the Lord took upon him this concern, saying, Surely indeed, I beheld yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, says the Lord. And I shall recompense to you in this portion of land, says the Lord. And now lift him and toss him in the portion of land according to the word of the Lord. And Ahaziah, king of Judah, beheld, and fled the way of Beth-agan. And Jehu pursued after him, and said, Even indeed him, strike him upon the chariot in the ascent of Gur, which is of Ibleam. And he fled into Megiddo, and died there. And his servants set him upon the chariot, and led him into Jerusalem. And they entombed him with his fathers in his tomb in the city of David. And in the 11th year of Joram king of Israel, Ahaziah took reign over Judah. And Jehu came to Jezreel, and Jezebel heard. And she tinged her eyes with antimony, and adorned her head, and looked through the window. And Jehu entered into the city, and she said, Is it peace to Zimri, the murderer of his master? And he lifted up his face unto the window, and beheld her, and said, Who are you? Come down to me. And 2 eunuchs stooped forward to look down at him. And he said, Roll her over. And they rolled her over. And her blood sprinkled against the wall, and against the horses, and they trampled upon her. And Jehu entered and ate and drank, and he said, Watch indeed this cursed one, and bury her, for she is the daughter of a king. And they went to bury her, and they found naught of her except the skull, and the feet, and the palms of her hands. And they returned and announced it to him, and he said, This is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by the hand of his bondman Elijah the Tishbite, saying, In the portion of Jezreel the dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the decaying flesh of Jezebel will be as dung upon the face of the field in the portion of Jezreel, so as to not say, This is Jezebel.